Hi. Yeah, I would love to thank everyone so much for joining us tonight. Everyone here is either in Tapped or supports Untapped or is a part of Untapped, and we're just so grateful that everyone trusts us with their children and is a part of our community. So thank you so much for being here. Also, thank you so much, Dr. Peg Dawson. This is such an amazing opportunity. I know for our staff, our mentors, our parents, our families. She is someone who I've looked up to for so many years. And she's been so influential, not only in my life personally, but also professionally. I think in my school psychology program, we spoke about her work all the time and how influential it was. So we're just so grateful. Smart but Scattered is such an excellent resource because it's so concrete, and I know that's what really supports us. So, very excited to have her here, and we are going to do a question and answer at the end. So, if you do have any questions, please type them into the chat. We'll monitor them, monitor the questions, and we'll ask some of the good ones or some common ones throughout the presentation. So, thank you so much, Dr. Dawson, and I'll let you take it from here.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I'm delighted to be here. Um, So you can see my title here, How to Improve Executive Skills Without the Frustration, which was not a title I came up with, but I did a workshop, a webinar a few months ago with someone in California who came up with this title. And I thought, why not? Let's build it around this. I think it's a little more optimistic. I think there is frustration involved when you're working with kids with executive skill challenges, but I want to try to give you an approach that may help reduce that frustration. My background is school psychology. I started out as a school psychologist working in the public schools for about 16 years. And then I joined my colleague and ultimately my co-author, a guy named Dr. Guare. We had a private practice for a while, and then we merged with a local community mental health center. And we're both easing out of that role actually this month. But for many, many years, we worked as clinicians, therapists, and assessment specialists at Seacoast Mental Health Center in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. My interest in executive skills came about as I left the public schools and started working in a clinic setting because I was seeing a lot of kids referred for attention problems. And as I worked with those kids more extensively than I had when I was in the schools, I pretty quickly realized that the American Psychiatric Association's diagnostic criteria for ADHD, which is problems with attention or problems with hyperactivity, impulsivity, or both, really didn't begin to describe the problems I saw these kids having. I saw huge problems with time management and planning and organization and those kinds of skills. And I remember talking with my colleague Dick about it at the time. Now, he and I both did our doctoral work at the University of Virginia, although we were there at different times. But he went on to do a postdoc in neuropsychology at Children's Hospital in Boston. So as I was describing these issues, he said, well, Peg, those are executive skills. Well, this was the late 80s, early 90s, and people were not using that term much in those days. So he and I decided we really wanted to understand this whole domain better. What are these skills? How do they develop? What's going on in the brain? How do they impact school performance? And most importantly, how do you help kids with weak executive skills become more successful students? So that's what led to our writing. We wrote a book for professionals first called Executive Skills in Children and Adolescents. It's now into its third edition. But after writing that book, we realized there was a huge role for parents in all of this. So that's what led us to write Smart But Scattered. And there are other books in that series, Smart But Scattered Teens, Smart But Scattered and Stalled. That's geared towards the sort of 18 to 25-year-old, the failure to launch kids. We also have a book for adults called The Smart But Scattered Guide to Success. So as I talk tonight and you start thinking, I may have some of these issues, you may want to take a look at that book because we have tips and strategies for adults who are dealing with executive skill challenges. Now, at the same time I was doing all of that professionally, I was raising two kids of my own. I have two sons who are now well into adulthood, but my older son at the age of 14 was diagnosed with an attention disorder. And I actually feel like a lot of what I've learned about executive skills, particularly on the intervention side, has come as much from my experience as a mom as my experience as a psychologist. And the nice thing about being the mom of one of these kids is you get the longitudinal perspective. You get to see what they look like when they grow up. And my message to parents all the time is most of these kids turn out fine. And if I'm doing a live presentation, I can almost see the audience relax at that point. Because if you're at the early stages of dealing with one of these kids, it looks pretty daunting. You don't know what the future is going to bring, but you know what? Kids grow up, they mature, their brains mature. And if you use the strategies I'm going to talk about tonight, which are described in much more detail in our books, these kids really do have a good shot at success, which is why I enjoy working with them. Okay, so with that as introduction, let me just say, here's what executive skills are. If the term is not familiar to you, I'm sure for most of you in the audience, it is if you've come here by way of Brandon's group. Executive skills are brain-based skills. They're managed out of the frontal lobes of the brain. They're the skills that you need in order, I mean, the scientists call it goal-directed behavior. Quite simply, they're the skills required to execute tasks. Or my favorite definition, which a second grade teacher took a class I teach at the University of Southern Maine every summer. She took my first class and she was trying to figure out how to explain executive skills to second graders. And what she came up with was they're the skills you need to get things done. And I think that's probably just about perfect. They take a full 25 years to reach full maturation. So these are not skills that anyone, even graduating from high school, has a fully functioning set of executive skills. And it's, as I say, it's a minimum of 25 years. And if you have an attention disorder or some other neurodevelopmental learning disorder, it's often longer than that. So they develop across childhood. Now, there are a lot of different models out there for executive skills, but these are the ones I often call this the smart but scattered model after the book that we've written that has sold the most. We talk about 11 different skills that make up our model of executive functioning. And I've started dividing them into two groups, somewhat arbitrarily, but I think there's a logic to my division there. I talk about the foundational skills and advanced skills. So the foundational skills are the first skills to develop. And the order in which I've listed them there is roughly the order in which they emerge developmentally, starting from shortly after birth. They are, in fact, the first 3 or 4, you can see signs of those skills even in the first year of life. Now, with the advanced skills, those are later developing skills. And even if you just look at the names of those skills, you can tell they are more complicated skills. That order there is more arbitrary, except for metacognition. We think metacognition is the last executive skill to emerge in any kind of sophisticated form. And of all the skills that are up there, you could probably come up with your own definitions for most of them. But the one that kind of confuses people is metacognition. So let me talk about that for a minute before we go any further. The throwaway definition for metacognition is, it means thinking about thinking, which I've never figured out what that means. So I've refined that definition to try to capture a little more about for what I think is going on, and also to build in the developmental perspective, because to be honest, once metacognition really develops, the brain changes dramatically. So metacognition is the awareness that you have thoughts and that you can use those thoughts to solve problems, make sense out of things, understand the world, and understand yourself. Now, obviously, kids have thoughts from a very early age. And when they first acquire language, all they're thinking is out loud. And then it goes underground. We call that internalized speech. So we have to guess at what they're thinking now. So obviously, kids have thoughts from a very early age. What they don't have is an awareness that they can use those thoughts as tools. And once they acquire that understanding, you will then see a bump in all those other advanced skills, because they are now using their thoughts to plan and prioritize, to create organizational systems, to manage time, and to set goals. Now, when I'm working with parents or teachers of elementary age kids, my message to them is focus on the foundational skills, because those skills are the first ones to develop. And if you put interventions in place to address those skills and keep them in place long enough, and that's actually a pretty critical feature to all of this, because people tend to give up on strategies before they work. If you keep them in place long enough, you will see progress across elementary school. Even in some of those skills, which are for some kids are really challenging, like response inhibition and emotional control. If you keep interventions in place long enough, you will see progress. Now, I'm not saying that you ignore the advanced skills. You certainly talk about and model planning. You show kids how to develop organizational systems. You walk them through that process. You help them set goals. But our assumption is that by the time kids leave elementary school, they are not going to be independent with those advanced skills. When I'm talking with parents or teachers of middle school kids, what I say to them is, if you think that by middle school years, kids will be proficient in those advanced skills, you must be pretty frustrated. Because for most kids, most of these skills at the middle school age are just emerging. And what do we know about emerging skills? They look great one day and lousy the next. I mean, think about learning to ride a bike. You don't go from not being able to ride a bike at all to being able to ride 3 miles fluidly without falling off your bike. No, there's a lot of falling down that goes on between those 2 points in time. And some practice sessions look better than others. Even into the early years of high school, many kids are still feeling their way with those advanced skills. They're still trying to figure out how to make them work for them. And I'm talking about typically developing kids. I'm not talking about kids with attention disorders or, again, other neurodevelopmental learning disorders. We know they're going to be delayed. But even typically developing kids, those advanced skills are slow to develop. And I guess the one other thing I would say is that if you have a child who has significant executive skills, many executive skill challenges, no matter what their age, start with the foundational skills, because those are the building blocks and those will feed into those later advanced skills. So if you're working on sustained attention and task initiation, that's feeding into planning and time management for sure. And the same with many of those other early foundational skills as well. Okay, so just to sort of reinforce that my statement that these skills take a long time to develop, I want to share with you a series of MRI scans that were taken by a neuroscientist many years ago now at UCLA, a guy named Paul Thompson. He brought the same kids in year after year. He started at age 4, he ended at age 21. Unfortunately, he did not go to age 25. I wish he had. But so each year he'd bring the kids in, take an MRI scan of their brain, send them home, bring them back a year later. And then he created a composite. So I'm going to bring you pretty quickly from age 4 to age 21. And what I want you to see is how late in the process the frontal lobes mature. The frontal lobes, again, are where executive skills reside. That's in the front part of the brain, right behind the forehead. Sometimes we call it the prefrontal cortex. Okay, so to understand these images, there are 2 other things I need to explain. First of all, the color of these scans. So an immature brain is red and orange. A mature brain is blue and purple. So you can see at age 4, there's nothing that's purple. What's blue are mostly sensory systems like vision and touch, because the sensory processing systems are the first parts of the brain to develop. Now, the other thing to understand is where are the frontal lobes? So in that right-hand image, which is a top-down image, the frontal lobes are at the top of that image because that's the front of the brain. And what you can see from looking at that, and it's very clear that at age 4, the frontal lobes are the least mature part of the brain, by yards, because that's mostly where the red and orange is. Okay, so I'm going to take you pretty quickly to age 21, and I want you to see how late in the process the frontal lobes turn blue. They do not turn purple because full maturation is not achieved at age 21, but you will see them turn blue. The other thing to watch for, because it's kind of fun, is the brain matures from back to front. The back part of the brain is the most primitive part of the brain. The front of the brain is the most advanced part of the brain. It's the part of the brain that really sets humans apart from other species. And so what you'll see as you watch this in that right-hand image, you'll see the blue start at the bottom of that brain, because that's the back of the brain, and you'll watch the blue travel up. Okay, so watch me do this. Okay, so there we are at age 21. As you can see, there's a fair amount of purple, but not in the frontal lobes. tiny bits of purple in the frontal lobes, still a fair amount of green. In fact, the text there says the 21-year-old brain is mostly mature, but the areas of green show that even at the threshold of legal adulthood, there is still room for increases in emotional maturity and decision-making skills, which will come in the next few years. Real quickly, I want to bring you back to age 13. Let's see if I can do this. Here we go. This is middle school. And I'm showing you this in particular because this is middle school is where I think there's the biggest mismatch between what the middle school brain is capable of doing and what parent and teacher expectations are for those kids to do. So you can see at age 13, the frontal lobes are mostly green. Progress has been made because at age 4, remember, is mostly red and orange. So there's not as much red and orange. But when I look at the blue at age 13, I'm not seeing a whole lot more blue than I saw at age 4. So think of what we ask typical 13-year-olds to do. You know, as soon as they start changing classes, every teacher has a different set of expectations for how homework is to be done, how projects are to be completed, how notes are to be taken, how notebooks are to be kept, how tests are to be taken. Many schools use block scheduling, and kids have to keep track of A days and B days. Many use rotating schedules. So first period on Monday is second period on Tuesday, etc. I've worked with several schools in the last few years that had 7-day rotating schedules. So first period on Monday changed from week to week. These kids have complicated after-school schedules, and many of them are living in 2 homes. And we get mad because they forget something. We are really stressing out a part of the brain that is really only halfway to maturity at that point. Okay, so what I want to share with you next is, because this will inform the rest of my presentation, this is my perfect intervention for executive skills. So I'm going to give this to you up front. And in fact, most of what I'm going to talk about after this probably meets this rule, because it's not a perfect intervention. It's a rule for a perfect intervention. So here's my rule for the perfect intervention for executive skills. The perfect intervention to support executive skill development is one that takes no more than 5 or 10 minutes a day and that you're willing to do forever, or as long as it takes. Okay, so those 2 statements go hand in hand. If it took more than 5 or 10 minutes a day, you couldn't keep it up long enough to make it work. So it has to be, you know, a short something that you do every day fairly consistently. Now, I will guarantee you, I can almost guarantee you that it won't take forever. I will also guarantee you that it'll take longer than you think it should. It just takes a long time for the habits we're trying to instill in kids to stick. And that's what we're talking about here, is habit formation. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through skill by skill so we all understand what the various skills are. I'll give you the definition, and I'll just focus on one intervention that we particularly emphasize as we're working with kids. There are a lot. Our books are full of additional strategies, but this is a good place to start. And most of these interventions can be done with 5 minutes a day. Okay. So response inhibition, first executive skill to develop. You can see early signs of response inhibition in kids as young as 6 months of age. It's pretty rudimentary at that point. Because at that age, kids have two options: respond, don't respond. My shorthand definition for response inhibition is it's the ability to stop and think before you say or do something. It is, some experts like Russ Barkley, who's I consider the world's leading expert on ADHD, maintain this is the most critical executive skill. If you don't get response inhibition, how are you ever going to get something like planning or time management or anything like that? So the strategy we focus on for teaching response inhibition is we teach wait and stop. If you can get wait and stop into kids, that's basically response inhibition. And there are some very natural ways that parents of young kids do this. I collect these stories, but I'll just share one of them with you. It's actually from my own childhood. My mother lived and died by a kitchen timer. I mean, she used it for everything. If we were dawdling over dinner, she would set the timer and challenge us to finish dinner by the time the bell rang. When I was practicing the piano, she set the timer. That was my practice session. But I remember her making me take a nap at an age where I really didn't think I needed to take a nap anymore. Now, I have to say, I grew up on Cape Cod. I had 3 brothers. We were all close in age. My father was an oceanographer. So what that meant was that he was out to sea 6 months out of every year, leaving my mom at home as the single parent of 4 rambunctious kids. Looking back on it, I think I was right. I don't think I needed a nap. I just think my mom needed time to herself. And so the way she got it was by making us all take naps. But I can remember lying down on the bed, and she'd put the kitchen timer next to the bed and she'd set it and she said, "You can get up when the bell rings." What was she doing? She was teaching me to wait. And that's the kind of thing, if you do those kinds of things day in and day out across early childhood, kids will learn that skill. And if you think about it, there are childhood games that have been around for generations, if not centuries, that do the same thing. Think about Simon Says, or Red Light, Green Light, or we had a game when I was growing up called Mother May I. I mean, all those games require the kids playing them to listen to the instructions, process their meaning, and make a decision. Am I going to act? Am I going to stop? Or am I going to wait? Okay, let's go on to the next executive skill, which is working memory. So this is, it's funny thinking about memory, because when I was an undergraduate psychology major over 50 years ago, we basically talked about long-term memory and short-term memory. When you look at the memory literature now, you realize there are all kinds of memory: declarative memory, procedural memory, retrospective memory. I mean, all kinds of things. But working memory, I really like, because it's exactly what it says. It's the ability to hold information in mind while you're performing complex tasks. So you're remembering information and you're working with it at the same time. If I want to stress this out in a testing situation, the easiest way to do that is to ask kids a multi-step math problem. I give it to them orally, ask them to solve it in their head. So a question off a standard cognitive measure: 8 birds are on the ground, 4 birds fly away, 2 other birds land. How many birds are on the ground now? If I ask a kid that question and they do the first step and give me that as their answer, I'm immediately thinking, what's going on with working memory? Have they forgotten what the question is asking? Have they forgotten what step they're on? That question also asks the child to hold on to the precise numbers in the question and to pull from long-term memory into working memory 2 math procedures: addition and subtraction. So there's a huge memory load to that one question. But really, there's nothing we ask kids to do that doesn't require working memory. Even one-step directions, sending them to their bedroom to retrieve a sweatshirt. They still have to remember why they're there when they get there. And I've done some work in schools for kids with dyslexia or more complex learning disabilities. And what those teachers tell me is working memory is the weakest skill for that population of kids. That's why they have trouble learning sight words and spelling words and math facts, or verbal instructions. And so the strategy we focus on with those kids and with kids in general is, whenever possible, we pair the verbal with the visual. So we're not just giving kids verbal instructions, because that's in one ear and out the other. We are giving them a visual reminder of the instructions as well. Okay, let's go on to emotional control, which is the next executive skill. Now, this skill, this may be the most complicated skill. I mean, the brain is hardwired for these skills to develop, but with emotional control, it's a pretty complex dance between the internal hardwiring of the brain and the environment that the infant finds itself in. So an infant who's in the best position to develop good emotional control is one who has a consistent, reliable caregiver who responds to his or her physical and emotional needs in an appropriate and timely fashion. And there's one additional ingredient: that caregiver is able to manage their own emotions well. Because there's a mirroring process that goes on with emotional control. We learn to manage our emotions by watching how those around us manage theirs. So in terms of, obviously this interferes, if you have a child with problems with emotional control, this can have a significant impact on learning, because if you're flooded with negative emotions, you are certainly going to have a hard time paying attention, to the lesson, understanding the lesson, and retaining it. So helping kids learn to manage their emotions is often, for kids who struggle with multiple executive skills, this is often the place we start, is by helping them figure out how to manage their emotions better. If you have kids who really struggle with this, nothing works fast. There are some very effective strategies if used over time. One is cognitive behavior therapy. So cognitive behavior therapy is based on the premise that our feelings are not caused by external events. They're caused by what we tell ourselves about those external events. So if we reframe what we tell ourselves about those events, that can change how we manage those situations. That's one. With younger kids who don't have the language capacity for cognitive behavior therapy, I will often recommend occupational therapy. They do a lot of sensory integration work, and one of the things they're working with kids on is, what does your body feel like? And when you're angry, overexcited or whatever, and can you adjust your body based on your body cues, or can you adjust your feelings based on how your body is reacting? Mindfulness meditation is another approach which has long-term benefits. And one of my favorite books for parents is called Sitting Still Like a Frog, because it's full of guided meditations. In fact, it comes with a CD with like 5-minute guided meditations. It's a great let's relax before bedtime activity with young children. But the one other point I want to make, and this is one we often forget to do, is the place to start is to start by acknowledging how the child feels. Just reflecting back, the child looks like you're feeling, whatever the feeling is. And we tend to forget to do that. We're quick to jump in and reassure kids, or we're quick to jump in and problem solve. And we forget to sort of step back and say, and acknowledge how the child is feeling. A couple of years ago, I did a workshop for a private school in North Carolina, and a mom came up to me after the workshop and was talking about her 8th grade daughter with ADHD, and said, she's constantly saying things like, I am so stupid. Why am I such a failure? How come everybody else can do this stuff and it's hard for me? And the mom said, I keep telling her, you are not stupid. You are not a failure. And I let her talk. And then I said, how about if you start by just letting your daughter know how she feels? So saying to her, wow, you sound pretty frustrated, or you sound pretty discouraged, or sounds like that makes you kind of sad. Whatever it is. The mom looked at me like I was nuts. And yet there's a ton of brain research to show that if you can label the emotion, that reduces the impact that negative emotion, the power that negative impact emotion, that negative emotion has over you. A guy named Dan Siegel, this is his area. He has a phrase for it: name it to tame it. So keep that in mind as well. Flexibility is the next executive skill. Now, I mentioned right off the bat that I got interested in executive skills by working with kids with ADHD, and kids with ADHD have all kinds of executive skill challenges. Flexibility is not necessarily a challenge for them. Very often it is a strength, right? Because these are go with the flow kinds of kids. But I'm sure you can think of kids who struggle with flexibility. When I ask a live audience, what group of kids struggle with flexibility, the first answer that often comes up is kids on the autism spectrum. And that makes sense, that rigid thinking is pretty much a critical feature of autism spectrum disorder. But I think of flexibility as an executive skill that sometimes lies beneath the surface. We see the behavior, we don't realize it started with inflexibility. So, for example, if you have trouble dealing with unexpected changes in plans, what happens when they occur? Your anxiety level rises. And so what we see is the anxiety, but what we may not realize is that it started with inflexibility. Or I think about kids with oppositional defiant disorder. When I'm thinking about those kids, I'm thinking about power struggles and control issues, and they're refusing to do what we've asked. But if you step back and say, what was the trigger? What led that kid to refuse to do what we've asked? Very often it was because someone was asking that kid to be more flexible than they were capable of being. And all they had was their behaviors way of saying, I can't do that. Interestingly enough, I've also had parents or teachers of gifted kids tell me that many gifted kids struggle with flexibility. And it may in part have to do with how we define creativity, or giftedness. We often define it as being able to absorb and take in and retain large quantities of information and understand things on an abstract level. But what happens is that's a fairly linear way of thinking very often. And what happens is when those gifted kids encounter something that they have to work at, they don't know what to do with that because they're so used to understanding things instantly. So in terms of strategies for flexibility, actually, I mean, flexibility can be taught. There's a website that I really like called Unstuck and on Target, where the people who created this website began by developing school-based curricula for flexibility, but they have a lot of parent materials. A lot of it is geared towards kids on the autism spectrum, but I like it because they really address common situations where kids are inflexible with tips for parents on, so how do you handle that? But more generally, I think if I'm focusing on one strategy for flexibility, it's helping kids find multiple pathways. What's plan B? The other thing about inflexible kids is they are linear. They think there's one right answer. They think there's one path. They think there's one outcome. They think they make a plan for how something is going to happen and they don't consider the alternatives. So if we help them consider plan B. So if a child has a great idea of having a sleepover on the weekend, she's going to invite her best friend, and yeah, it's going to be great, but she hasn't even asked her friend yet. A parent might say, okay, so what are we going to do if Susie's not available? I think we need a backup plan. So helping kids come up with plan B, and just thinking about plan B is one of the approaches we use to help kids think more flexibly. So sustained attention is the next executive skill. Now, this one obviously is a critical feature of kids with attention disorders. There's a key phrase in my definition here, though. The definition is the capacity to maintain attention to a situation or task. And the key phrase is in spite of distractibility, fatigue, or boredom. And that's a really important phrase. I don't know how many kids I've seen over the years. Their parents have been nudged into my office by a teacher or a pediatrician because someone thinks their kid has attention problems. And they'll say to me, my kid can't have ADD. He can play video games for hours. Well, video games don't involve distractibility, fatigue, or boredom. So what I tell parents in those cases is it's not that kids with ADD can't pay attention. It's that they have trouble making themselves pay attention. That's not going to show up with video games. Where are parents going to see it? 3 places: homework, chores, boring daily routines like self-care, showers, teeth brushing, things like that. We have a lot of strategies for sustained attention. This is one where the feedback I'm getting from teachers all the time is this one kids really struggle with from kindergarten through high school, in part, and it feels like it's gotten worse since the pandemic. I was at a lobster restaurant last week on vacation in Maine, and the waitress was a 7th grade teacher. So we got in conversation with her, and I explained, my area of expertise is executive skills. What are your kids struggling with the most lately? And she said, oh, definitely sustained attention. So I think it's an issue. I think we have to get back to how do you explicitly teach kids how to pay attention? But I also think one place to start is, and parents can do this, ask the child how long they can go before they need a break. So it gets them thinking about, how long is my attention span and how long can I go before I need a break? And it's also giving the kids some ownership and some ability to reflect on their own attentional capacity. And so if you say to the parent, okay, or say to the kid, okay, you got 20 math problems to do. How many do you think you can do before you need a break? And if the kid says 3, then that's fine. You set up the 3 and then you build in a short break and bring them back. And once they've done that for a while, then you try to stretch it. Okay, can you do 4 math problems before you take a break? And you gradually try to expand their attention span. Okay, task initiation is the next executive skill. And I'm firmly convinced that this is the last executive skill to reach full maturation. I've been talking about these skills in the order in which they emerge. That says nothing about the endpoint in terms of when do they reach full maturation. And if you type procrastination, which is the opposite of task initiation, into an academic search engine, you will be hit with over 6,000 citations. Obviously, I haven't read all of them, but I've read a few of those articles, and one of them gave me a developmental timeline for procrastination. And here's what it said. So remember, procrastination is a bad thing. What it said was procrastination increases until the mid to late 20s and decreases gradually after that. Surveys of college students have shown that 86% of college students say that procrastination is a problem for them. Almost half of them say it affects their grades. When I read that article, I thought, man, we have got to figure out how to teach task initiation. If we could figure that out, we could increase college graduation rates. We could decrease the amount of time kids are spending in college and save parents thousands of dollars. And so I've done a lot of thinking about how do you teach task initiation. My first thought was, well, teach kids to start right away. But that makes no sense because you can't start everything right away, because then when are you going to finish everything? So here's where I've landed. It won't work in all cases, but I think it's actually a pretty versatile strategy. I think what you do is teach kids to make a plan with a start time, and then make sure they start the plan at the time they said they were going to start it. So if you say to your kid on Saturday morning, so what's your plan for cleaning up your bedroom? And the kid says, I'll do it right after lunch. Well, then your job as a parent is to be there right after lunch and make sure your kid starts cleaning their bedroom. And here's why this is important, because the brain learns by association. So the more you pair two events or glue them together over and over, then event A eventually triggers event B. It's a variation on Pavlov's dog. It's probably the most famous psych experiment ever done. Remember that Russian psychologist? He rang a bell, he presented meat to the dog, and the dog salivated. After a while, all he had to do was ring the bell, and the dog salivated because he anticipated that the meat was coming. So stated start time, actual start time, and then cue them to start at the time they said they were going to start until they no longer need your cues. Okay, so those are the first 6 foundational skills, right? Those are the ones we focus on with younger kids or with kids with more significant executive skill challenges. They're the building blocks for the later skills. They also lend themselves to easier interventions. It's a whole lot easier to teach a kid to make a plan with a start time than it is to teach them to make a plan, which is the next executive skill. Planning is way more complicated. Planning is, what am I trying to accomplish? What resources and materials do I need to accomplish it? How am I going to get them? When am I going to get them? What are the steps I need to follow to carry out my plan? What's the logical order of those steps? What's important? What's not important? All of that goes into planning. So when I think about planning in a school context, I immediately think about long-term projects, which I decided many years ago, there's a mismatch between when teachers start assigning long-term projects and when kids can independently plan those long-term projects. And I think teachers understand that now. So they do the planning for kids. They break the project down into subtasks and timelines and interim deadlines, which is totally developmentally appropriate. However, it fails to take advantage of the opportunity to teach planning. So my message to teachers all the time, and the same applies to parents, is how about you do the planning with kids rather than for kids? And in terms of what parents have available to them, you can do planning around fun stuff. Or, Saturday morning, you say, got with these chores, these errands, and these fun things we want to do. Let's make a plan for the day. And so you can just do that with your kids in a pretty natural setting that builds in not just work, but also fun stuff. Now, there's one other issue around long-term projects, which I think is worth mentioning, and that is when teachers assign long-term projects, they invariably expect kids to carry out those projects at home, which unfortunately puts a lot of pressure on parents then to supervise those projects. So a few years ago, a friend of mine found this picture on Facebook she shared with me, which I think really captures the problems nicely. It's a science project. I don't know if you had those when you were growing up, but I certainly remember them. But here's the topic of the science project. How much turmoil does the science project cause families? And it's set up the way a science project is. So you have the materials on the left-hand side, at least one kid, at least one grudging parent, half-baked ideas of very dubious merit, and procrastination. And then the center, you have the results section. You have this really nice graph showing yelling and crying on one axis and time on the other axis. And the closer to the due date, the more yelling and crying is going on. You have some quantitative results. 75% of kids cry, 90% of parents yell, an average of 15 hours of family time is sacrificed. Findings, everyone hates the science fair. When I do this with a live audience, I've had a number of them burst into applause at this point because they can so identify with this dilemma. Okay, so that's planning. Let's go on to organization. Now, there's a key word in my definition here. The definition is the ability to create and maintain systems to keep track of information or materials. Again, when I'm talking with a live audience, I often say to them, so what's the key word? And people throw things out: systems, ability, create. And my response to that is, because this is my weakest skill, my response to that is I am great at creating systems of organization, because every 4 weeks I have to come up with another system to keep my study clean because the last one didn't work. It's the maintenance part, right? And if you have ever tried to turn a disorganized kid into an organized kid, you know this is a long-term labor-intensive process, because it's not just a question of creating a system and handing it off to the kid and expecting them to run with it. It's not even everybody's organizational system is unique. So it's not even a question of helping the kid develop their own organizational system. So saying to a kid, you know what, your backpack's a mess. You can't find your homework when you need to do it. You can't find it when you need to hand it in. Let's take your backpack apart and put it together in a way that works for you so that you can find things and store things the way you need to. You still can't hand it off to the kid and expect them to run with it. And I finally realized why this is the case. It's because at any single point in time, it is faster not to use an organizational system than to use one. Yeah, it's way faster to take that science worksheet and stuff it in the backpack wherever than it is to take out the science notebook, open it up, take out the incomplete homework folder, open that up, put the homework neatly in, close everything up neatly back in the backpack. Yeah, it may take longer in the long run, but in the moment, it's faster not to use the system. I think there's one other aspect of organization, which I've discovered from talking about it over the years with both professional and parent audiences. And that is that parents and kids don't always have the same executive skills profile. There's a strong genetic component, and your kid may have gotten some genes from your parent rather than you. And sometimes when you have contrasting executive skills profiles, that can create some tension in the family. And one of the worst combinations I've come across is when you have a highly organized parent with a slob of a kid, because that kid's messiness just grates on the parent. They have such a hard time tolerating the messy bedroom, or tolerating a messy bedroom that's not as neat as they would like it to be. They can't close the door and pretend they can't see it. And so it's just really tough. And so therefore, the strategy here is to keep it simple. Start really small. Have the kid be responsible for keeping one place organized. Maybe it's the surface of their desk where they do their homework. So just before bed, they're cleaning off the surface of their desk. I had a parent who told me she took masking tape and divided her child's bedroom into like 9 sections. And the kid started out responsible for only one of those 9 sections. And gradually she increased the amount that he was responsible for cleaning up. So there are ways of doing this, but I think keeping it simple, starting small, not having unrealistic expectations, and assuming that it's going to grow over time. Okay, time management. So this is where we start seeing the earlier executive skills factoring in here, because time management is basically task initiation, sustained attention, and planning, with one additional element that's unique to time management, and that is time estimation, the ability to estimate how long it takes to do something. And in my experience from working with people with poor time management skills, it's the time estimation piece that doesn't work well for them. And when I'm working with kids, more often than not, what I find is they underestimate how long an effortful task is going to take. And then they leave it to the last minute and run out of time, pull an all-nighter, or blow past a deadline if they're in high school. I do see a subset of kids, though, who do the opposite, and adults for that matter, who do the opposite. They overestimate how long a task is going to take, and then they don't want to start it because in their mind, it's going to take forever. In either case, the strategy to start with is just practice time estimation. And with a kid, there's so many different ways to do that. And we can talk to a kid, how long is it going to take you to make your bed? How long will it take you to get dressed in the morning? How long will it take you to do this math worksheet? How long will it take you to get ready for school? Whatever you want to work on, just have them make a guess and then write it down and compare their estimate to the reality. And over time, they'll learn to estimate more accurately. And I think so practice time estimation is my strategy there. Okay, we just have a couple left. Goal-directed persistence. So again, this is where you see the earlier developing skills factoring in here, because when we talk about goal-directed persistence, we're not talking about short-term goals. I mean, you can see goal-directed persistence in very young children. You know, a 4-year-old is putting a challenging puzzle together and they're not going to stop until they get that puzzle right. That's what it looks like at that age. By middle high school, we're talking about longer term goals. We're not talking about things they can do by lunchtime, but we're talking about marking period goals or yearly goals, or what's your goal for your summer vacation, or what do you want to do after high school? So with that in mind, you can see how all the other executive skills factor in here, because you can't just set a goal and forget about it. You have to remember it. So there's working memory. You have to have a plan for achieving the goal. So there's planning. You have to start and finish the plan. So there's task initiation, the sustained attention. You have to resist the temptation to do all those other fun things you'd rather be doing than working on your goals. So there's response inhibition. And if that's irritating or annoying to you, then you also have to manage your emotions. So there's emotional control. You know, virtually every executive skill we've already talked about factors into goal-directed persistence. And here's the mistake that a lot of parents make. First of all, they expect kids by middle school to have this skill, and in most cases they don't. But second of all, we tend to focus on our goals as parents, or we tend to look at this whole domain through this very narrow window. This was the mistake I made. I mean, when my kids were in middle school, I was thinking about goal-directed persistence in terms of academic performance. So I'm leaning on my kids to make the honor roll or to bring their grade up in math or whatever. They weren't there yet. So our first suggestion is start with something the kid wants and sort of encourage them to achieve that goal. By the time kids hit high school, there are a couple of things that many teenagers want that require goal-directed persistence. They want a job or they want their driver's license. Both of those have multiple steps and require persistence over time. With younger kids, one of my favorite ways to encourage goal-directed persistence is have them save up money for something that they want that costs more than their weekly allowance. Because then you can talk to them about how you're going to earn the money. How are you going to save the money? How are you going to resist the temptation to spend smaller amounts of money on something smaller before you saved up for that big thing you want? So all of those are ways to encourage goal-directed persistence. And again, starting by setting small goals rather than big goals. And then finally, metacognition. I gave you one definition earlier. It's the ability to see the big picture. It's the ability to connect the dots, to put the pieces of the puzzle together. It's hard to talk about metacognition without using a metaphor, which is apt because meta is the same in both. If I were going to use more psychological terms, I'd talk about self-awareness, self-evaluation, self-monitoring, that kind of thing. It's the little voice in your head that's sort of monitoring you in the moment. So did I remember to put my math book in my backpack for homework? Did I leave enough time to get the work done? Have I checked my answers for my homework or for this test? Or if you get a test back and it wasn't the grade you wanted, you reflect on, what did I do that may have contributed to that low grade? What can I do differently the next time? All of that is metacognition, very late developing skill. One of the key ways we encourage metacognition is to have kids, we encourage self-reflection. How do you think that went? What went well? And in fact, we particularly encourage self-reflection following successes. You know, too often we zero in on, the kid gets in trouble or makes a mistake. What went wrong? What can you do differently the next time? And we forget to have kids think about their successes. What strategy you brought your math grade up? What strategy were you using? What did you do differently this time compared to the last math quiz? Okay, so those are the 11 executive skills. We'll get to some general strategies for how you encourage executive skill development in kids. But before we do that, there's one more point I want to make. And that is I want to talk about the language we use to describe these kids. So this was a kid I saw many years ago now. Actually, I saw him twice. He was 7 the first time I saw him. He's one of the most hyperactive, impulsive kids I'd ever seen at that point. He managed to get through elementary and middle school successfully. He had a couple things going for him. He had a mom who stayed on top of him. First of all, he was a bright kid. He did not have a learning disability. He had a huge attention disorder. Couldn't take stimulants because he also had Tourette's syndrome, and he couldn't take stimulants because they exacerbated his tics. But he managed to get through elementary and middle school successfully. And then he hit high school and basically crashed and burned. So his mom called me after his freshman year in high school and said, I can't do it by myself anymore. I'm going to need help from the school. And so she asked me to evaluate her son again, to provide the documentation to get him additional assistance. We were able to do that. We actually, the school agreed to hire a coach to work with him. So his freshman year in high school, he had failed 2 classes. He was in summer school making those up. He had D's in 2 other classes. He had an A in 1 class, which amuses me. The class was ROTC. Now, this is a kid who wanted to join the military. This was a high school. Not many high schools offer this program, but this one did. He wanted to join the military, so ROTC was in line with his long-term goal. But on top of that, if you think about what an ROTC class is for a kid with ADHD, it's probably both structured and regimented and active and outdoors. So it was perfect for him. He aced it. So we set up a coach for him, and I called back the next year to see how he'd done. His sophomore year in high school, his report card looked like this. He had 2 C's, 2 B's, and an A in ROTC again. So he brought his grade point average up considerably. But as part of my documentation to convince the school he needed additional help, I asked the mom to find one teacher who knew him well to fill out rating scales on him. This is just one piece of one of those rating scales. What concerns you most about this pupil? That he's lazy and not working to his potential. Please describe the best things about this pupil. He's sweet and has a good sense of humor, which describes just about every kid with ADHD that I have ever worked with, including my own son. But I just want to call your attention to the negative terms that teacher was using to describe him. Lazy, not working to potential. Those sound like character flaws to me. Those sound like things that nobody has any control over. And what's the intervention for lazy? So if you don't take anything else away from this presentation tonight, except for what's on the next slide, I want you to sort of absorb this. I realize I'm probably teaching to the choir, but at any rate, these are terms I've collected over the years. Instead of calling students this lazy, unmotivated, not working to potential, disruptive, oppositional, messy, tardy, forgetful, absent-minded, or lacking a work ethic, and all of those are terms I've had either parents or teachers or both use to describe the kids that I've worked with. How about we describe them as having challenges in task initiation, sustained attention, response inhibition, emotional control? All those negative terms on the left-hand side have a corresponding executive skill on the right-hand side. The left-hand side terms are dead ends. The right-hand side brings you to problem solving. Now, you may not refer to your kids this way, but you may have relatives who do that. And if you have a relative who says to you, man, your kid is the laziest kid I've ever seen, you might want to sort of gently say, actually, I think it's problems with some executive skill challenges. I think he's got huge issues with task initiation and sustained attention, and we're trying to figure out a way to help him. So that's how I prefer to think about it. Okay, so what do we do about it? There are really 3 primary ways parents and teachers can help kids with weak executive skills. And these are described in a great deal of detail, both in Smart But Scattered and Smart But Scattered Teens, and in our professional books as well. We can change the environment to reduce the impact of the weak executive skill. So our goal is not to make the kid different there, but to create an environment that's more rewarding, less punishing. We can teach the youngster the executive skill that they don't have, or strategies for improving that executive skill. Or we can use incentives to get youngsters to use skills that are hard for them. In the early stages of any skill acquisition, it's painful, laborious, it's hard. And so our thought is, if we can use an incentive or a reward to entice the kid to do the practice they need to get better at that skill, then it's worth it. So let's take them, step by step. Ways to modify the environment. We can change the physical or social environment. We can modify the tasks we expect kids to perform, or we can change the way adults interact with kids. And here are just a few examples. help kids manage distractions. You know, a lot of kids will complain that where they're trying to get their homework done at home is way too noisy, way too much going on, TV going on in the next room, a sibling playing a video game, parents arguing in the kitchen, whatever. So is there a way to help them manage distractions so they have an environment that works for them, which doesn't necessarily mean a completely quiet environment. I've had kids who told me when it gets too quiet, then I have a really hard time paying attention. And one of the issues that often comes up with parents is kids listening to music while they're doing their homework. And they will often say to me, can you tell my kid not to listen to music? I know it's distracting him. And my response to that is actually, I can't. Because there's some pretty persuasive research out there to suggest that music may actually make it easier to focus because it screens out bigger and more unpredictable distractions. Now, you may want to talk to your child about what music they're listening to. You know, my son with ADD said he could never listen to music with lyrics because he started paying attention to the words, but instrumental music worked for him. Modifying the tasks we ask them to do, shortening them, building in breaks, creating a schedule, building in choice. Giving advanced warning when something changes, that's particularly helpful for kids who are inflexible or kids who have problems with emotional regulation. And then use visual cues rather than verbal nags. Here's just one example I love sharing because it was sent to me by a parent who came to one of my workshops a few years ago. She had a kid who was in high school, had block scheduling every day. He had different classes. He kept losing track of what classes he had when. And also, you know, some classes he had to hand in his homework via email, some on Google Classroom, some with backpack papers or whatever. So she created this giant smart whiteboard calendar. She set it up for him every month. She listed which classes he had, which days. She's got it color coded. So if there's email, that's red, Google Classroom is blue, backpack papers is green. She's working off of 3 schedules. She's got 9 different dry erase markers. If I asked you what executive skill strength does this mom have, I'm sure you'll be able to answer that question. I've had some parents look at that and say, oh my God, I couldn't work with that. It worked for her and it worked for her son. She posted in a prominent place, and every day before he left for school, she had him check his schedule to make sure he knew what was happening that day. Okay. And then there's changing how we talk to kids. And probably the one place to focus on is the use of praise. And there's actually some pretty compelling research to say that if you can achieve a ratio of 3 positive statements for each piece of corrective statement or each negative statement, that alone can change behavior. There are a couple of problems with that. First of all, it's really hard to remember to do that. And second of all, there's effective praise and there's ineffective praise. And unfortunately, it's a whole lot easier to use ineffective praise. Nice job, great work, smart kid. But what is that telling the kid? It's telling them not much about what it is they're doing that is praiseworthy. So this is what effective praise looks like. Specifies the particulars of accomplishment. You know, I appreciate you loading the dishwasher without my having to bug you about it. You're really praising 2 things there. You're praising the kid for loading the dishwasher and doing it without having to be nagged. Or another one there, your brother was pushing your buttons, but you worked hard to keep your temper in check. You know, what I like about that one is maybe the kid ultimately lost his temper and belted his brother, but you saw him trying hard not to do that. And maybe the next time he'll try a little harder, and the time after that, he'll actually keep his temper in check. Orients the child to appreciate her ability to problem solve. I like the way you thought about that and figured out a good solution to the problem. Anytime we can praise kids for problem solving, that can carry over into multiple settings because there's social problem solving and academic problem solving and problem solving for how to get along with siblings or how to handle unexpected events. So the more we can praise kids for problem solving, I think the payoff is big for that one. Okay, let me talk real quickly about how you teach the skill. Our general approach is, this is our formula. Whenever possible, teach the skill by embedding it in a daily routine the kid has to do anyway. List the steps in the routine, walk the child through the steps repeatedly, create a visual that outlines the routine, and then fade the prompts by having the child use the visual to follow the routine. Let me give you 2 examples of what that visual would look like. This is a bedroom cleaning routine. It was actually created by an occupational therapist I worked with at a residential school for kids with dyslexia a few summers ago. And the school decided they had to tackle the bedrooms. They were just way too messy. So what they decided was, when kids came back to school that fall, the first thing they would do is make sure everything got put away. The bedrooms were neat to start with, and they took pictures of what a neat bedroom looks like. And then they created a personalized checklist and hung it up on the wall in the kids' bedroom. What I like about this is there are 10 things on that checklist, which is pretty daunting for me because I'm organizationally challenged. But they've broken it down into 4 pieces. That's doable. They built in a time every day for the child to clean their bedroom, which was between the last study hall of the day and dinner. Again, it was a residential school. So that's one example of how you embed a routine, and how you can list the steps and use pictures. Here's another one. This is teaching kids to make study plans. This is not to replace an assignment book. This is like an expanded to-do list. It's to help kids figure out how they're going to spend their evenings. So what you have them do is you have them list the tasks they have to do, like spelling, math, reading. And then in the next column, you ask them to estimate how long you think that each task is going to take. So what are we working on there? Time management. The next column, when will you start? That's the plan with the start time. Okay, that's task initiation. Where will you work? So now we're looking at this one supports the plan, but we added that question in after reading all the literature on mental rehearsal and visual imagery, because what that research shows is if you mentally rehearse carrying out a task, especially if you use vivid visual imagery, it makes it more likely that the child will carry out the task, as well as it makes it easier for them. So with those 4 steps, you now have a package. You now have what the kid's going to do. Math, he thinks it's going to take 20 minutes. He's going to start at 5 o'clock. He's going to work in the kitchen. Now we have it all in one place. And if you actually have them track the actual start and stop times, that's to check on 2 things. Did they start when they said they were going to start? And were they right about the time estimation? And then it's a to-do list, so you check off when you're done. So that's step 1, or that's our first approach to teaching skills. But we've actually we've refined that in recent years, because that's a pretty top-down approach. That's you as the parent saying, first do this, then do this, then do this. Our preferred approach now is to engage the child at every step of the way, so that it's a joint problem-solving process. So you're still going to use Formula 1, but now you're going to collaborate with your child. You and the kid together are going to decide what problem you're going to tackle. You and the kid together are going to come up with the steps to tackle that problem. You're going to create the checklist. Maybe the kid will take pictures of himself doing it or find clip art. The kid will be involved in creating the checklist. You agree on the start time, and then you follow through from there. And then find the incentives. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Parents, I know, have very different values around incentives, but I'm pretty pragmatic. So my thought about incentives is they make the effort of learning a skill and the effort of performing a task less aversive, because there's a reward at the end. And when you put in the center after a task, it teaches delayed gratification, which means you're teaching kids to wait. So that's response inhibition. Now, I have successfully created some fairly elaborate incentive systems over the years that involve point systems and kids tracking points and getting points for different kinds of behaviors all associated with executive skills. But to be honest, whenever possible, I rely on simple incentives. And this first one is my favorite. Give the child something to look forward to doing when the effortful task is done. We call that Grandma's Law. Okay, first, you bring in the garbage cans, and then you get the chocolate chip cookies I just baked. Alternating between preferred and non-preferred activities. First work, then play. Building in frequent short breaks, and then using specific praise. Okay, so in the last few minutes, I just want to summarize what I think the key points that I wanted to make with this presentation are. What I consider the biggest bang for the bucks. Keep tasks and chores brief or build in breaks so that it matches the kid's attention span. Give your child something to look forward to doing when the effortful task is done. Build in choice whenever possible. Use lists and checklists as reminders. build in routines. Anytime something becomes a routine, it then becomes second nature, and it takes way less effort, way less working memory. It's much easier to accomplish the task once it's a routine. How can we work with kids to get them to use their own executive skills? Ask them to reflect on their own performance, especially when they're successful. What worked for you today? Why do you think it worked? Use questions to get them to use their executive skills. What's your plan? It's funny. I have my oldest granddaughter who's now 10. I could tell by around 18 months of age, she was pretty inflexible. She got it from her grandmother. And her mother handled her beautifully. So she would, when things didn't go the way Violet thought they were going to go, she would say, okay, Violet, let's make a plan. Let's make a plan for what we can do instead, or let's make a plan for what we can do between now and when we get to do what you want to do. So let's make a plan became sort of a mantra for them. Do you have a strategy for that? What's your goal? How long do you think that will take? When a problem arises, I can never say this with a straight face. When a problem arises, share your observations in a non-judgmental way. I notice that what do you think we can do about it? And I say that because I could never do this with my own teenagers. They were way too good at pressing my buttons when they were teenagers. However, I'll still pass it along to you, because we know that teenagers in particular are triggered by emotions faster than any time in their lives. And they're triggered by parent emotions more than anything else. So if you are able to stay calm, then there's a greater likelihood that you and your teenager will have a reasonable conversation and come to a good decision about how you want to handle the situation. Brainstorming strategies and having a child select one to try. Make a game plan for trying it out. Keep your eye on the biggest prize, which I think is building goal-directed persistence. Model this yourself. That's how I got through my kids' middle school years. I swear I saw no goal-directed persistence in them, and I kept telling them, you know what? They have two parents with tremendous goal-directed persistence. At the point where they find their passion, when they're older, they will channel that. And sure enough, they did. Both of them, throw themselves 100% into their work. Help them set and achieve little goals, praise effort, emphasize your child's goals, not yours. And then finally, be patient. Your child at 15 will not look the same at 25. Brandon and I were talking before this started, and we were talking about how the biggest danger parents have is projecting down the road and making assumptions about what your kid at 15 is, what their life path is going to be like. And I just want to use an example. Again, I can do this because my kids are grown up. I'm going to use an example of one of my sons. He's given me permission to do this. And this was not my ADHD son. This was my other kid. This was Isaac. That's what he looked like when he was 15. Look at that haircut. That stage didn't last very long, but he went through other weird haircuts, and I just sort of bit my tongue and thought, oh, will we get through this? Here's what he looked like 10 years later. Actually, he looked like that like 4 years later. He didn't go to college. He had amazing computer skills at a time when you didn't need a college education to get a job in computer security. So he started dressing like that at the age of 19. But if you had told me that at 15, I would have breathed a sigh of relief, but I might also have said, are you crazy? I don't think that's going to happen. Okay. So just a couple of quotes from people. Do these strategies work? I throw this stuff out and I'm never sure whether they work or not. This was a mom who wrote me a few years ago. I already used some of the tips you offered regarding emotional control of my daughter last night as we worked on her language assignment. We set the timer, took breaks, got a drink of water. And when she really started to freak out, I asked her to make a plan. And I thought of your daughter-in-law and smiled. Estimating how long it would take to do the assignment and then doing it in less time than she thought made my daughter feel so proud. When it was all done, I praised her ability to self-regulate and her effort to stick with it, even when it wasn't going the way she wanted, especially when I too wanted to freak out, yell, quit, and quit. Smile. This other quote is from a teacher who's also a parent. She was a teacher who worked in the school district I did some work in, but she sent me this about her own daughter. Just tonight, my daughter needed help on an assignment. When she showed it to me, it was obvious she knew how to do it. She just didn't like it, thought it would take too long, and wasn't sure how to get started. Thank goodness, because I know way more about breaking down an assignment than I do about the agricultural revolution. I gave her a couple of strategies. Work for 20 minutes and take a break. Do what you know and skip the hard parts. About 15 minutes later, she was done with all her work. Sometimes the strategies seem like stating the obvious, but they are powerful in their simplicity. And then one final quote from a mom from a presentation I did a couple months ago. She wrote, I attended your parent presentation in Perrysburg. I wanted to reach out and say thank you for all the wonderful material you provided. My oldest son is autistic. My middle son struggles with attention. Visuals have been such a lifeline in our household for years, and it was so affirming to hear what you shared about helping kids find workarounds for their working memory deficits. The slide you shared with the formula for teaching executive skills is exactly what I found worked for my son, especially the oldest. Took all the guesswork out of our trial and error and put words to the process that parents and students might use. And at the very bottom, she says, recently we found a visual that works very well for our family, and I wanted to share it with you. The boys call them their 815 list, a Velcro list that forms pictures on the front as they complete the task. At 8:15, they grab their lists and work through the last few things they need to do before we walk out the door. She actually has a website where she offers this. She sent me a bunch of them. They are really wonderful, and I'm sure she can personalize it for you. But you start with the list open like this, and as they do each item, they close it. It's Velcro. They close it and they get to see the picture. And so it just walks them through the list. So her website is there if you want to see what she has some nice examples on her website. Okay, that's it. We're now down to Q&A. I'm going to get out of this, but I just want to share this is one of my favorite New Yorker cartoons. It's called The Big Book of Parent-Child Fights. If you see the table of contents, food arguments is chapter 1 is on page 1, and the last chapter is called Miscellaneous Battles, and it's on page 9,505, which is what it feels like sometimes. Okay, so I will get out of that.
That was awesome. Thank you so much. I learn so much from you every time that I hear you speak. So thank you so much. We got a lot of nice comments. I know people really appreciated the language that you went through. I think that's so important to reinforce is, character traits versus these executive function skills. The brain scans are fascinating. What's developmentally appropriate versus what we expect. I thought was really helpful. And we got to a lot too about just goal-directed praise and goal-directed processes. So thank you so much. It was awesome. A few quick questions for you. I know a lot of times we see people, and this is a common question I get, people who first get the diagnosis or their problems start to arise. So when there's so many different challenges, what do you focus on first? What's like the one thing that you do?
Okay, so there are several different answers to that. In general, though, I would start with one of the foundational skills, just because I think they feed into the later skills, unless all those foundational skills are fine. There are two different ways of attacking that, though. One is to start with whatever is getting in the way the most. And in general, although we use these executive skill terms, when we're trying to figure out where to start, we're focusing on a behavior. So let's say response inhibition is a problem. We're going to focus on interrupting at the dinner table, or we're going to focus on not talking back, or taking turns with siblings, whatever it is. So we're translating whatever the executive skill is into a particular behavior, because we can't tackle response inhibition all at once. So we either start with the one that's getting in the way the most, that's the most disruptive to, family functioning or to the kid feeling okay about themselves, or we pick one where we think we're going to get some quick success, where we think that this kid needs a cushion of success before he's willing to risk something harder. So we may take something he's actually already pretty good at and just tune it up a bit so that he has some immediate success, and then we can tackle something bigger after that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I love the immediate success piece, because when you're in this challenge, you get so much negative feedback. So having that immediate success to draw upon is great. And I've talked about this before, the concept of like the lead domino. Like, what's one thing we can work on? What's one routine we can implement that makes 5, 10, 15 other things kind of improve, like exercise or something of that nature. So no, that's awesome. You kind of addressed this at the end, but for so many of us, including myself, like getting out the door on time. So, we saw the elementary strategy. Do you have any strategies for middle school, high school, and us adults who struggle getting out the door and getting to places on time?
Well, again, starting with that time estimation, I mean, taking the list of what do you need to do before you leave in the morning and figuring out how long each one of those takes, and then hit the time that you need to leave and then reverse engineer it and just say, okay, so let's back up. If you need to build in wiggle room, you may need to do that. I mean, that's a pretty detailed approach. I had a woman who was responding to that question, and what she had learned about herself was she kept trying to do all these things before she left in the morning to go to work. And she finally realized that when she thought to herself, okay, I'll just do this one more thing, that was the cue that she needed to leave right then. So not do that one more thing. I had a coach working with who took my coach class a couple of years ago, where she was just struggling so much with a kid who was chronically late to school. The solution she finally came up with, she finally said to him, do you have a friend who goes by your house in the morning on the way to school? Would he be able to pick you up on the way? And because this kid didn't want to be in his pajamas when his friend showed up, that worked for him. One of the things, and this is a general one, this may answer several questions. One of the strategies that coach uses, which other coaches have as well, is what they call a barrier strategies protocol. So it's like a T-chart where you write the problem at the top, like getting to school on time in the morning. And on this left-hand side, you list all the barriers, what gets in the way. I stay up too late the night before, I sleep through my alarm, it takes me too long to get dressed. I mean, each one of those might be a barrier. And then for each of those barriers on the right-hand side, look for a strategy for that. So that might be one to use, because for every kid, it's probably a different answer to how they get to school on time.
Yeah, no, I love the one more thing. Like that's the cue that I need to stop.
Yeah.
I know I probably need to do that for like going to bed, like not one more email or anything like that.
Oh, that would be another place where it would help. Yeah, good point.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I know something just to kind of add on that we've seen really help is, if you get out the door late in the morning, it means you kind of messed up the night before. It's like, how do we get everything ready the night before while we have peak attention in order to get us out the next morning? We have a quick follow-up question on that. Because I know we see this a lot too with high school kids. Have you heard anything that works with them getting themselves up on their own with alarms or something like that? That's something we always get stuck on.
Man, I wish I did. And I say that because my younger son, Isaac, the one you saw in that picture, actually had a sleep disorder, which it was a circadian rhythm disorder. So his body did not want to fall asleep before 2 a.m, which meant that he still needed 8 hours of sleep. So he was chronically sleep deprived and chronically struggling to get out of bed in the morning. He tried different things. I mean, loud alarms on the other side of the room. So there are actually alarms which will that will move so that when they go off, they'll fall off the table and roll around on the floor. Anything to create a distraction. Looking back on it as a mother, I thought, why did I not use this? Is not for what the kid can do themselves, but because I, as a parent, was stuck in how am I going to get my kid out of bed in the morning? I thought, why didn't I use a water pistol? I think that would have worked. But
No, I love your social pressure answer too, because so often, obviously, kids rebel against us. That's developmentally appropriate, but if they're being picked up by someone else, that's a great thing as well. So,
yeah.
love that. Here's a really hard, broad one. When should you let your kids fail? How do you think about this framework versus intervening?
Oh, really good question. So I have a couple of thoughts about that. One is, I have a really hard time letting kids fail. On the other hand, I think it's important for kids to make mistakes. So a distinction between making mistakes and failing. And here's where I'm stuck, because I think, there's a lot to be learned from making mistakes, and there's even maybe a lot to be learned from failure. However, if you keep failing again and again and again, what are you learning? So to me, part of it is looking at what happens when you let them make mistakes. Did they change their behavior as a result? Did they learn something? Did something get better? If not, then you sort of intervene and say, okay, let's put our heads together and see if we can figure out what to do about this. I do have a problem with bailing kids out repeatedly. I think that's probably what you're referring to there in terms of, I don't think that's helpful. On the other hand, we've all been parents. I mean, my kid was in danger of losing his license for speeding the second or third time. And hired an attorney to to get that to get the time reduced for which he didn't live without his license. So it's those are hard decisions to make. But I do feel like if every single time we are picking our kids up, that's probably a signal that we're probably doing too much. What's your thought about that, Brandon?
So we always come at it, John Wooden, for any sports fans out there. He's one of the most famous coaches of all time. Um, he always talked about, when a young person does something wrong, 80% of the time it's incompetence and 20% it's disobedience. So 80% of the time they don't know what they're doing, they don't know how to do it correctly, and 20% of the time they're just being disobedient. So we try to look at it through that lens. Like if they don't talk to their teacher, have we taught them how to do that? And if we've taught them how and helped them and they still don't do it, well, then that's disobedience. They need to deal with the consequences.
Mhm.
So that's kind of our framework. Again, that's easier in theory than in real life, but that's how we come at it.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good way of thinking about that.
So I think last one I have two more. So we talk about you talked about self-reflection to build attention. And attention is so challenging for so many of us, especially right now more than ever. How do you use self-reflection to build attention?
Okay, so I have an answer for this. Actually, what I think about with attention is more self-monitoring. Are you monitoring whether you're paying attention or not? There are different strategies out there, and I'll just name three. Actually, I'll name four. There's an iPhone app called the Original Beeper app. It costs, here's what it looks like. Costs $1, used to cost $1.99. I hope it's the same thing. So basically what you do is you decide how long you're going to work. How long is your work session? I'll just set it for 5 minutes. And then it starts a timer, and at random intervals, it sounds a tone. When that tone goes off, the kid using this app asks himself, was I paying attention? And they have to, the circle in the middle of this app, which is white now, turns blue. You have to hit that blue circle. Yep, see here, there it goes. See how it's blue? Okay. And so then I hit it, and then it goes back to monitoring again. So what it does for those kids who are really, they don't even know when they're drifting off, this approach will pull them back in. There's a very similar program called iConnect. That's lowercase I and connect, all one word. It's out of Kansas State University. It too does a self-monitoring function. But I'll tell you, a few months ago, I was up against renewing my psychology license, and I had to do talk about problems with task initiation. I had to do like 40 hours of continuing professional development in 1 month, in amongst all the other things I'm doing. So then I had to sign up for webinars, which is when you sign up for a webinar to do professional development, you have to pay attention, because then they give you a quiz and you have to pass the quiz. So I decided I was going to monitor my own attention and try out different strategies. So I tried out this one. I tried out iConnect. But the one that I found worked the best was just taking an index card. And every time I found myself drifting off, you could do it with a post as well. I just put a little slash mark on the post-it, and that would pull me back. And so you can set a goal, if you're doing, 30 minutes of math or something. Oops, sorry, it's still doing this. Oh, and actually when you're done with this one, if you say I'm done, you're going to hear some celebratory music. And it tells me I was 100% on task because I hit that blue circle fast enough. So that's what that does. But I just found that just doing this, every time I caught myself drifting off, I would write it down. And just that practice of catching yourself drifting off is probably the best way I know of to train yourself to pay attention better.
It's such a helpful thing to say, because the goal is to not lose attention. The goal is to catch yourself. It's that metacognition, it's that self-assessment piece. And I think there's a misconception there. Everyone's like, I keep losing attention, or my kid keeps losing attention. Like, that happens. The goal is to figure out when that starts to happen, and then to reorient or develop tools and structures around that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Last one. And I know this is something we see with about 20% of our kids. So checklists, planning works really well for 80% of our kids. There's those 20% that rebel against checklists. Do you have any thoughts or how families could work on that, or is it just need to take care of business with the checklist?
Yeah, I mean, I would start with a conversation. Yeah, I understand you don't want to use a checklist. So what do you think would help you remember? Are there other things? Can you put an alarm in your smartphone? Can you use the reminders in your smartphone? Can you um, have someone remind you rather than you creating your own checklist? So talk about what are the alternatives to checklists. But here's another thing which I think can help with some teenagers, because the kids who are the most resistant to using checklists tend to be kids with attention disorders. They're kids who see that as extra work, and they don't want to do anything that's extra work. And on top of that, they don't think they have a problem, or they don't think the problem is as bad as anybody else thinks it is. And in fact, there's a good reason for that. They have a cognitive distortion called positive illusory bias. I mean, we all have this to some extent, but it's particularly pronounced in kids with ADHD. They think they don't have to keep a checklist because they're going to remember it. Um, it's a bias they have. It's an illusion. It's not true. They're not as good at remembering as they think they are, but it's a cognitive distortion. So they fully believe that. So can you collect data? Can you say, okay, we'll try it your way for a week. Let's see how many things you forget. I'm going to track it. Okay, now what do you think we can do about that? So that's number one. But the other thing is teaching kids the concept of offloading. For those kids who think that it's too much work to write stuff down, tell them that, you know what, the brain doesn't work as hard when you offload stuff. So if you're not using a checklist, that means your brain is having to hold on to everything. Your brain is working way harder than it needs to. If you offload it to a checklist or a reminder in your phone or whatever it is, your brain's not working as hard. So why wouldn't you do that?
And also we've seen too, and I know there's some research on this, but when we get that out of their brain and onto something, into some kind of, whether it's a planner or electronic thing, like anxiety significantly decreases. It's that whole brain is for having ideas, not holding. So yeah, getting their
Yeah,
buy-in and accountability through that.
yeah, no, that's absolutely true. I mean, if I can't travel without a checklist now, and the time when I did that, I realized I needed to do that was I drove to a workshop that was 3 hours away from my house. I get to the hotel that I'm staying at. I think, oh, I'll just answer a few emails, and I realized I've left my laptop at home. I had to turn around and drive back home to get that laptop, another 3 hours, and turn around and drive back again. So that's where I realized, and so that's the anxiety piece when you realize that you've forgotten something. So yeah, I like that, connecting that to reduced anxiety as well.
Yeah, there's a great book called The Checklist Manifesto if anybody's
That's my
interested. It's
favorite book. It's
yeah,
one of my
it's it
favorite books. Yeah.
because our kids
And
view checklists and systems and planners and they view it as punitive, but it's like how like doctors, pilots, like some of the most effective, productive people will how they leverage this thing. And so
yeah,
it's just a different way to frame it to help
yeah.
our kids out, to let them know there's nothing wrong with them. We all use this.
Yeah, I often talk about the checklist manifesto. And a few years ago, I mentioned it to a presentation I was doing in Minnesota. And a woman in the audience raised her hand. She said her husband had trained as a pilot. And when he was in pilot training, one of the things they said to those pilots in training, under no circumstances do you memorize the checklist. Do not memorize the checklist, because if you do that, you'll forget and leave the cargo door open and the plane will crash. So
Yeah,
so it was really good advice, because I mean, I think people think, oh, you only need checklists for a while, and then you've got it all in your head and you don't have to use a checklist anymore. No, for critical stuff, you probably want to continue to use checklists forever.
absolutely. Cool. Dr. Peg, thank you so much for being here. Yeah, it was so great. It was so valuable to so many people in our community. So thank you so much. She's probably too humble to do this, so I'll do it. Smart but scattered. It's a phenomenal resource. Whether you pick up the kind of the core version or the one for teens, parents, failure to launch, whatever that is, teachers. It's just such a great book that's so concrete. That's been so helpful. So thank everyone. I'd like to thank everyone so much for coming. Thank you again, Dr. Peg. And yeah, please let us know if you need anything, if you have any more questions. But thanks again. Have a great night,
Okay.
everyone.
Yeah. Thanks. This is fun. Bye bye.